Hi, this is part three in our series on how to build a rally road book. If you have not watched parts one and two, you should be able to find them linked in the notes below. And in here, we're going to talk about some general guidelines in laying out a road book. So, without further ado, here you go. All right, this is episode three on our How Do I Build a Road Book series. I've got Jimmy Lewis here with me, helping me get this kicked off, providing some of his experience to give us some perspective on how we're doing this. So in the first two, we kind of introed what a road book is. In the second one, we said kind of went over how do I decide the writing area and what am I kind of overall looking for. Now we're going to talk about a few more detailed some pieces of advice before we get into the mechanics of actually pulling up a map and start building a road book. So we kind of touched on this at the end of the last one. You definitely want to, when you're first doing this, you want to start small. You don't want to try to build a 200-kilometer road book.
And there's a really good main reason for this is because in the beginning, you're probably going to be doing it wrong, and you don't want to spend a lot of time doing it wrong and making mistakes. So it's good to start out small because just in writing your own road book, maybe having a buddy help you try to ride your road book, you might find like, oh, I've got to go back to the drawing board. And I've seen a lot of people that make map books make this mistake, and they spend 20 hours on a road book, and it's done completely wrong, and it's difficult to correct. So
yeah, it's true.
Start small, baby steps.
Yeah, literally make a road book that goes around your block, 6 turns, and then go ride it and understand how the instructions you're putting together actually translate into someone riding it. Because one of the other things that you begin to learn is that sometimes you make road books that are really dense. You're labeling every single turn and every corner, and you begin to understand that some of those things aren't required. And maybe when we start talking about writing a road book sometime in the future, we'll talk about some of the nuances. Maybe even later in this, we'll talk about how you really don't need to label every single turn and corner.
Yeah,
but
and in doing that, you're going to realize that something that may actually have been boring for you to ride before, a regular dirt road all of a sudden becomes a little bit more interesting because you have to pay attention to what's coming up, judging your distance, knowing which direction you're pointing, making sure you're ready for the next instruction. So this is kind of something that you can take advantage of, and it actually becomes pretty fun.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. The sections that before maybe had a lot of spurs coming off of them and you never paid attention. Well, now when you're navigating that, you're trying to figure out whether you missed an instruction because you didn't see that in the road book. But I'd encourage you to go out there and just build something simple because after trying to build one building one and trying to ride it, you really are going to learn what begins to be a valuable instruction and what is actually kind of a waste of time. And it's better off to start with something simple and kind of a general layout, and then add more detail. As Jimmy had said, I've seen people build road books with lots and lots of detail. They put lots of energy into them, and they're kind of broken. They actually don't work at all.
Yeah, they could have been made much simpler, and you'll find a happy medium. But for sure, it's going to be frustrating in the beginning, and probably even more frustrating when everybody tells you how to do it different or better. And like I always, especially the guys that I've never ridden one of their map books, I always like to point out, it's like, hey, when you make yours, you can do all those kind of changes. So that's the way to encourage them when they're giving you that kind of feedback. And your first road book, and a lot of them, they may be really bad. So just kind of get that in your head. You're learning. It's almost like learning a new language. It's learning art. And like I say, road books are art, and everybody's going to be critical of your art, or not everybody. Some people really appreciate it, and so you just got to take the kind of the good with the bad, learn the steps, and then take the criticisms and the compliments together, and just keep building. And over time, it's really not that hard to become a really good map book maker, and then you'll have more friends that way if you make map books.
Yeah. and they don't need to be complicated. The more detail you can put into them, the better the chance of someone navigating it cleanly and maybe navigating it a little faster. But really, in order to make it fun, it doesn't have to be detailed or perfect. This is Jimmy, I don't know if you can see this on my screen. This is This is a road book I built for spring last year to share with literally like 3 friends. Put a little note about how to start, expecting two-way traffic, me always being safety conscious. And you can see this isn't a competition level road book. I mean, these aren't in French, there's all sorts of things. There's lots of nuance and you start to get to some different types of competition, but these are super simple. And these, we'll talk about this more later when we're building it out, but these indicate that the way I build a road book, when they're a dotted line like this is typically a single
It's single track, yeah.
Yeah, that's but other people use their own conventions. There's people, as Jimmy said, there's art here, and people use different colors to paint their pictures.
Yeah, and when you're looking at this on the note, like to me, that means I'm on a single track that's going to turn into a road, but where it turns into the road, this is at kilometer 5.36 or mile 5.36. We work in kilometers all the time. That I'm going to not continue on the road. I'm going to take a single track that goes off at a cap heading of 191 off to the left. And with Jimmy World, left and right doesn't seem to work for me, so I rely on the cap heading. But there's lots of interesting stuff, and this is the stuff that you will learn as we go through this series to tell you some of the specifics. And again, it's kind of art form. Generally, when you see differences in guys, maybe someone thinks a single track should be a straight black line as opposed to a dotted line, where a dotted line means there's no trail at all. And so that's where you have to figure out the guy that's making the map book, what he's trying to tell you. Maybe in the instructions in the beginning, he will give you that kind of information. And that's where it kind of comes into, building these things.
And my friends like to laugh at me because when I say, this is where in the first series when I was talking about my cruel factor, when I say faint trail, it's usually pretty faint.
Faint could be not existent, or one cow walked on it last week, right?
Yeah.
So,
but
hey,
real quick, Jimmy. Just like here, and I built this one, and we'll talk about this in a second, but I built this one, I had the GPX tracks, but I built it using Google Maps, and I saw that in this, look, it's kind of complicated here, that there were some trees that were going to help the guys navigate it.
And that's your giveaway. You know that, hey, when my odometer should be around 9.9-ish, I'm going to go past a couple trees, and I'm going to start staying left. So, hey, that's a good way to kind of talk to it. Like there are a lot of ways to get started, and we're going to go kind of from worst to best when we talk about this stuff. And your number one is making it purely off of the Google Earth or Google Maps. And so it's as simple as there are tools to do this, and you basically can find the area where you're going to use. You're going to look around for the dirt roads and the trails and stuff, and you're going to figure out kind of in your head your global route where you want to go. And as Phil scrolls around with the computer,
look at that nice one, Jimmy.
Yeah.
That would be that's a good one, right? That's a nice interesting area.
That's a tricky one with a lot of options. There's a main road going through there and a couple side roads that go off that you can see. And so this would be a place where you could do some more tricky navigation, but at the same time it's also difficult to draw that. And another thing that you have to take into consideration when using only Google Earth is, over time, when was that Google Earth image taken? Because over time, maybe one of the more main trails is now one of the least traveled trails, and then all of a sudden, a UTV group the week before came through and blasted out the faint trail that you had. So there's lots of interesting things like that. So you can if you have local riding knowledge of an area, and then you can kind of double that with Google Earth, that definitely kind of helps. And the disadvantages or some of the challenges with Google Earth that you have are, if you're not familiar with the area, there could be fences that are hard to see, we call it cut tracks or ditches, some of the bumps in the ground, stuff that would really stand out to you when you're riding will likely not show up, and things change over time. So generally, if you build it on Google Earth only, when you get done writing your road book, you will have to come in and make quite a few corrections to fix it up and get it all ready again.
Yeah, I've never built one just on Google Earth and had it work successfully. You can't expect that.
No.
You're gonna find a fence. You're gonna get there, and the trail that was on Google Earth that looked faint, maybe, or maybe even looked real, it could be completely gone. It does happen. It happens way more often than you think it would.
Correct.
Or I've built big road books of where there was shared GPX files, and we got out there and the trail was closed down. Forest Service was, I don't know, had closed down a section of trail. And then then it gets interesting where you're trying to figure out how to route around it live so you can continue to run the road book, and it adds another fun level to navigation.
Yeah, and your second one is kind of like shared GPX files. So this would be importing your GPX file into your Rally, your navigations or your Tulip note building software, whichever one you're using. You can bring it in, and then it'll overlay it on the maps that are there. And most of these are using Google Earth as sort of like the background mapping.
Right.
And so there's a lot of routes that the Google Earth verifies, or it has some information that says, hey, this is a route. And so you can see how close that is to, routes that they've determined kind of exist or are out there. And then if you have, other friends that have ridden the same areas, sometimes you can collect some of their GPX tracks to say, hey, this is a fun loop, or this trail, I like, this. And you kind of start stitching them together and using segments to kind of, cut, mix, and match. So now you're using two mediums. You're using somebody has actually ridden on this area, somebody's driven on this area, and we verified it that way. And then, hey, Google Earth shows us that there is a route and a trail here, and you combine those two tools to, make it all work together.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that I've had as much success, especially if I haven't ridden in an area or I haven't ridden there much, where I might have some tracks that I've created myself, but I want to put a bigger road book together. I literally just contact my riding buddies and say, hey, do you have any favorite sections that you've saved in a GPS file on? And people, especially your friends, are usually pretty happy to share, especially if they're going to get to use the road book when you're done with it. They're happy to contribute to the project. And then you can, if a section was ridden at one point. Now, again, you don't know now if it's open today, but if you knew it was ridden at one point and you can, as Jimmy said, stitch them together, it's a pretty good starting point for a road book that works. And, the best way to do it, or certainly another way, is if you've actually ridden something yourself, right? Where not only do you have a GPX file, you've ridden it yourself and you've saved the GPX file. Because not only do you have a GPX file, but since you've ridden it yourself, you can sort of remember some of the nuances, like in that one road book I had with the trees and things. Now, I wouldn't recommend using this GPX file as an ideal starting point, but this is Google Earth that I'm kind of scrolling through here.
Yeah, and you look at that now. What I see when I look at it, I see a lot of options. You see a lot of where you've gone the kind of the wrong way, up dead end canyons or down to something else, and that's if you were just using Google Earth and you saw that track and you said, hey, I'm going to ride out here, but then it comes to a cliff, and you think, oh, maybe I could ride down that. On your route book, you might have a bunch of guys sitting at the edge of the cliff going, hey, Phil, how are you going to ride down this? So when we start combining all this stuff, using Google Maps, using GPX files, and then having gone out there, and maybe you do the first two, and then going out there and riding it would be your final verification, and then you can come back in. But I also warn you that you may be super familiar with an area, and you think you've marked all of the dangers, or you'll put a danger someplace that you thought it was, and maybe it's a kilometer before or a kilometer after. And if you're really good and you miss that one danger, that can also be pretty bad. So when I tend to make road books, and I suggest this to other people, is I kind of go light on the dangers. Like, I put the ones that are going to kill you, I make sure they're in there. But the other ones I kind of expect you to terrain read. Like, even though you're doing a map book, you can't throw your brain away, because if you're not only if you're on the route, the dangers are marked, but just if, for instance, if you by mistake get off the route and you think you're on the route and something dangerous comes up, there's no way we can kind of control that. So that's a good thing to kind of be aware of, is that don't you want to put as many dangers in as possible, but don't ever expect that the road book is going to be perfect in that essence.
That's a really good point, and I'd say I probably follow the same set of guidelines. All the triple dangers, literally the washouts where it's gonna be I call it a helicopter ride home. I do my best to mark all those, but the rest of them, unless there's one that's sort of an interesting piece of terrain that you also can use for a marker, I do the same thing, because once you start building these road books, especially if it has some distance, if you're at a 75 kilometer road book or more, you're talking tens of hours to put one together with enough quality that friends could navigate it cleanly.
Yeah, and the map book will change. Things will change over time. Some dangers will go away, some will pop up, and so it's always kind of a work in progress. And as much as if it were an organization running a race, they send someone out to verify it literally the day before. So we're not in that. We're just kind of doing this for fun. But I think when you kind of go back to this, the steps to do it, the best way is to use an area you're familiar with, go out and ride it, collaborate on some GPX tracks with your friends. Pay attention to what you see when you're working with the mapping software. Do these routes kind of correlate with what you're seeing on the ground, and then go out and ride it yourself and kind of verify it and make it into a good book.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else that you want to add on this, Jimmy? The next session, I'm going to actually start. I'm actually in this area on this Google Maps here. We're going to start building a simple road book. But is there anything else, kind of at a high level, that we want to add on the background?
No, I think as you get into it, you'll get into the more specifics. But the idea is, it's actually, as much as we say, hey, your first ones are going to be difficult and tricky, you don't. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And if you don't try, you'll never know. And if you really enjoy navigating, like I tell my high-level riders, I make them make map books, because then they understand more of what it takes to navigate properly. So that's my tools.
That's good. Actually, I wanted to add just a couple more things. When I rode this route, I was specifically out looking for interesting things. So I'm sure Jimmy spotted this in my GPX track, right? Where there's a railroad here and there's some weird roads, but nobody would ever go ride this. I mean, it's just like a weird road. Like that's not a dirt bike riding area. But I was leaving this area next to the highway going, I wonder where this goes. I wonder if I can get over the railroad track.
There's a bridge, right? Or a crossing?
No, it's literally some logs put, it's a switch point where there's a flat spot over the top. It's not actually I'm sure they drive vehicles over that, but it's like a private thing. But you don't have to actually do your typical, railroad crossing. But this starts to make for an interesting little navigation section here.
It's like you said, places where you ordinarily wouldn't ride all of a sudden become fun due to the map book factor.
Right. So, and the other one was that area that I was showing earlier, where there's a hill climb that somebody couldn't make it up.
Especially from the side hill. Yeah, you take a couple runs at it.
So, so then I was trying to figure out, okay, you can see the tracks. There's a possibility for a very interesting downhill here. And again, the cruel side of me goes, and what's interesting is it's not really marked from the top.
Yeah.
Okay? So you could have a road book that you better get your mileage right to take a left and go down the hill, because there's all sorts of little tracks, but you're not really going to know you're on track until you're about halfay down the mountain.
Yeah.
So again, that is just
and the side of the mountain may be cliffs if you go off the wrong one, right?
It is.
So
this is me when I'm riding around going, I wonder if that would be interesting. And again, where a place that you might not normally ride, actually has some interesting navigation possibilities and the chance to get some people lost. So I'm always paying attention for those things because I like putting together a road book that has some challenges in it. Anyway, Jimmy, thanks for giving me some time and helping us go through this. We may bring you back as we're going through some of the other sections to help me comment on some nuances. But thanks for giving us some time. We
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thanks a lot. I'm stoked to get people interested in this, and then they can understand, from a smaller perspective, the higher level how they're doing it in the racing world.
Excellent. All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. That's the end of that section, our part 3. Part 4 is coming up where we're going to be using Tulip to actually start laying out the road book. Hope part 3 and 1 and 2 as well were valuable. And if you need to wait for part 4, just hang on and it should start playing, or you should be able to find it in the links below. Thanks. Bye.